This video is part 4 in a series detailing recent major developments regarding the US government and UFOs, and the subsequent coverage in mainstream media. Since December of 2017, the US government and mainstream media have treated the subject of UFOs with a newfound seriousness. This fourth installment of the UFO News Recap series covers the major UFO-related events to occur between June and December of 2021. I recommend watching the previous installments of this series to catch yourself up on the previous years. I didn't realize until I was making this video just how many high-level active American politicians from both sides of the aisle have made statements on UFOs recently. To emphasize this point, in the first 3 installments of this series covering UFO developments from the 4-year period of December 2017 to May 2021, we had 2 active senators speak on UFOs, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia.
What concern should we be about the briefing that you received on UFOs? Is that a concern that for pilots? Is there anything you can mention to us about that?
Well, I think some of the press reports are accurate. I think people are taking this issue much more seriously.
And Senator Marco Rubio of Florida.
Look, here's the interesting thing for me about all this, and the reason why I think it's an important topic, okay? And that is, we have things flying over our military bases and places where we're conducting military exercises, and we don't know what it is, and it isn't ours. So that's the legitimate question to ask.
In this current installment covering the 6-month period from June to December of 2021, we have statements on UFOs from over 10 active members of the US Senate and House of Representatives. In this video, we will be covering a lot of in-depth legislation. There's far too much to cover in full, so we will be summarizing much of it. I recommend reading the full legislation mentioned, linked in the description. During the second half of 2021, we saw many major UFO developments, so let's begin. Where we last left off and are picking up now, we were waiting for the highly anticipated UFO report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, or ODNI. Reminder, the ODNI was the office created following the intelligence failures of 9/11 to ensure cooperation and sharing of information across the various intelligence agencies. To briefly recap how we got here, in 2017, the Pentagon revealed the existence of a secret UFO program. At that same time, 3 Navy videos of alleged UFOs were released, which were later confirmed to show unidentified flying objects by the Navy and the Department of Defense. In the years following the reveal of the Pentagon UFO program and UFO videos, various House and Senate committees received classified briefings on UFOs. Following these classified briefings, the Senate Intelligence Committee included in its Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021 a stipulation that mandated the Director of National Intelligence work with the Secretary of Defense on a report detailing what the government knows about unidentified aerial phenomena to be released to Congress in 180 days. The $2.3 trillion appropriations bill was signed into law on December 27, 2020, making the 180-day report due in June 2021. And in the lead up to the release of this report, we heard various statements from politicians regarding UFOs and the upcoming report.
President Obama says that there is footage and records of objects in the skies, these unidentified aerial phenomenon, and he says we don't know exactly what they are. What do you think that it is?
I would ask him again. Thank you. Come on, boss, let's go.
Next month, you're going to get a Pentagon report on UAPs. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, it's been interesting to be able to track. I have to tell you, when I first joined the Intel Committee, a friend of mine pulled me aside and he said, "I know you can't tell me classified information, but you got to tell me if we've got UFOs. you got to be able to tell me that." And it's been really funny to be able to go through this process. There is something happening that some of our ships are tracking. We assume this is a military surveillance vehicle that's being used by another country. I don't assume it's from another planet, but if so, this is a technology that exceeds our own on actually speed and maneuverability, and it's something we've got to be able to continue to learn more about.
That's scary.
What is actually being done.
What do you think about all this UFO stuff going on right now?
I think we need to get to the bottom of it. It's pretty intriguing. I don't know what it is, but anytime you have legitimate pilots describing something that doesn't seem to conform to the laws of physics that govern aviation and is in U.S. airspace, I think it's something we need to get to the bottom of.
But this is quite a serious issue. There are these unrecognized objects in U.S. airspace that are also known as unidentified aerial phenomenon, I understand. And I wanted to see, there's a DNI report that I understand is going to be released soon. Can the Biden administration commit to releasing it in full?
Well, that would be for a decision by the Department of National Intelligence to make. As you noted, we're aware of the report requirement, and our team at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence is, of course, actively working on that report. And we take reports of incursions into our airspace by any aircraft, identified or unidentified, very seriously and investigate each one. But ODNI would be working on that report, and in terms of disclosure, that would be up to them.
Well, I'll start you off with a UFO question. How about that?
Go for it.
Has Secretary Austin been briefed on this report that's required by Congress? And also, just more broadly, does Secretary Austin see this, what apparently is an increasing number of reported incidents, as a safety report for the military in terms of pilot training and so forth, as well as a national security threat?
He has received a briefing on the work that the task force has thus far conducted. The report, as you know, is being crafted and will be delivered by the Director of National Intelligence, but he has received a briefing on the work thus far. And as we've said before, we take all incursions into our operating spaces seriously.
Are these UFOs a national defense concern, national security concern for you?
It depends on what it is. I mean, if we we'll see the report. If there's, I'm as interested as you in seeing it. I don't know if there's a classified version of it. I'll find out in a week. But we are always concerned. I'm the chairman of Emerging Threats and Capabilities on Senate Armed Services. So if our adversaries have developed, technology that we don't understand and have made, sometimes countries make technological leaps that we don't anticipate. If somebody made a technological leap, it's important that we know about it.
During this time, the UFO community became acquainted with another person who was shaping up to be a major player regarding UFO developments: NASA Administrator Bill Nelson. What is the NASA Administrator? The NASA Administrator is the highest-ranking official of NASA. The Administrator is NASA's chief decision-maker, responsible for providing clarity to the agency's vision and serving as a source of internal leadership within NASA. This position is appointed by the President of the United States and was previously held by people like James Webb. Prior to the holding of this position, Bill Nelson served as both a congressman and senator for the state of Florida for many decades. And NASA's Cape Kennedy Space Center is located in Nelson's old district. Coincidentally, Bill Nelson has also been to space. In 1986, he was selected to be a citizen astronaut and went into space aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia, 1 week before the Challenger disaster. Bill Nelson had an over 30-year career in the House of Representatives, and he was the ranking member of the United States Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities, so he was one of the senators that received the classified briefings on UFOs. Bill Nelson was appointed to the position of NASA Administrator on May 3, 2021, and has since been fairly vocal regarding the subject of UFOs.
On the TV recently, on the Navy films, I had known about this in my former capacity in Intel and the Armed Services Committee. And I've talked to those pilots, and they think it's real.
What you've seen is what those Navy pilots saw in 2004, and there have been some 300 sightings since then. And I've talked to those pilots, and they know they saw something, and their radar's locked onto it. And then all of a sudden it was here on the surface, and then it's there. And they don't know what it is, and we don't know what it is.
When people think of mysterious things flying in the sky and aliens, they think of NASA. So what have you guys been briefed about in terms of this report? Have you been involved in any way?
I was actually briefed on this a couple of years ago in my capacity on the Senate Armed Services Committee. NASA appropriately is going to look at it through the lens of its scientists, and that's what we're doing.
But do you think the agency should be more involved at this point?
Well, we are, and I've started it. I've been here a month, and I've started it.
And are you guys working with the Pentagon then on that report?
We are not directly working with them, but I can guarantee you if we find something, the Pentagon will want to know.
On June 5th, 2021, multiple news agencies reported that the House Intelligence Committee received classified briefings on the upcoming report. It should be noted that this is one of those moments where it seemed like multiple news agencies had been ready with the information and they all released their respective stories at the same time. What was interesting is that these outlets reported that the upcoming report does not rule out alien craft.
And also this morning, a highly anticipated report from the U.S. government is shedding some light on all of those mysterious UFO sightings. The report, which is set to be released later this month, is mostly inconclusive, but of course, it is raising a lot of questions from a lot of people. Intelligence officials found no evidence that those flying objects were extraterrestrial spacecrafts, but they're also not exactly ruling it out.
UFO sightings have been getting quite a lot of attention, including from our federal government. A highly anticipated report from intelligence officials on UFOs found no evidence of extraterrestrial activity. But hold on, Stranger Things fans, because they can't rule out the possibility of an alien spacecraft either.
That the report will not definitively point to evidence of alien activity, but will not rule it out.
I think that's ridiculous. If the Russians had UFO technology, I mean, they would own us right now. They used to say that. I've heard people talk about how the Nazis had it in the Second World War. But if they did, they would have won. That is ridiculous. It has to be something that's out of our galaxy. It just has to be if it in fact is real.
Even when something's supposed to be released coming up in a few weeks or months, what do you think is going to be in that?
I don't believe it. I think Roswell was covered up. I think more people believe in UFOs than believe in Congress for good reason because of the jackleg stuff we do like that. We talk about we're going to release it and then we never do, or we release something that's so redacted that it's just ridiculous. The Air Force had a release on Roswell, which was the big deal, I think, from '48, and the big cover up there. And the guy that did it was a smart aleck, and he kind of smirked the whole time, and nobody took it serious. They ought to take it serious. The American public wants to know, and frankly, we deserve to know.
We do have reason to be concerned until we're able to rule out any threat to the traveling public, to those military pilots, to our military facilities, and other places.
Is the right thing to do.
The Pentagon's report on a number of unexplainable sightings will be released in weeks. Senator Heinrich hasn't seen it and isn't expecting a lot of answers.
I think we just don't know what we're seeing.
ABC News is reporting some of the movements could not be pulled off by a human pilot or a man-made aircraft. Heinrich backs up that theory.
And certainly, if you were a human being inside something that moved like some of these objects, you would not be well.
Yeah.
You wouldn't. You probably couldn't survive the kind of movements that we've seen.
These encounters are puzzling. Heinrich wants to change the conversation we're having about them.
And I think what's important is for us as a government, if we're going to take these things seriously, is to stop trying to sweep it under the rug and really do the science of figuring out, what are these things that the pilots are seeing and that are showing up on radar, etc.
Then on June 25th, 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released the highly anticipated UFO report. The unclassified publicly released version totaled 9 pages. There are varying reports that lawmakers on the Congressional Intelligence and Armed Services Committees received a 17-page or 73-page classified version of the report. The 9-page publicly released version is linked in the description. I highly recommend reading it for yourself.
The question was, what are they exactly? Over the years, several powerful political figures in Washington, including Senator Harry Reid, have pushed the U.S. military to reveal all it knows about UFOs, but in every case they have failed to dislodge that information. Then last year, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida inserted a demand for transparency into a federal appropriations bill. By the end of June 2021, the government was required to turn over its full assessment of UFOs. Just a few hours ago, that report finally came out, late on a Friday. We've only seen the public version so far, but here's what we can tell you. Government investigators seem sincerely baffled by what these things are. Today's report analyzed 144 separate sightings of UFOs by the U.S. military. But in only a single case could the government explain what it was. In that case, it was a large deflating
government
balloon.
report on UFOs lists 144 known sightings of unidentified aerial phenomena. Now, the study released on Friday found only one of those can be explained, just one. The report is a rare example of the government acknowledging that it has investigated UFO cases. As David Martin reports, the lack of explanation is fueling even more questions about what else may be out there.
The report details the history of how the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, or UAPTF, came to be, from the Senate provision in the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021, and that this report is designed to help lawmakers respond to potential threats posed by UAP. It also mentions that the data set used for the report was the U.S. government reported incidents of UAP occurring from November 2004 to March of 2021. This piece really upset many in the UFO community as it ignores the 75-plus year history of UFOs in the US government. Page 4 details the difficulty the UAPTF had in gathering data for cases. They make the point of noting that the Navy did not have a formal UAP reporting system until 2019, and the Air Force didn't have a formal reporting system until 2020. The UAPTF heard many anecdotal accounts that were not included in the report because the mechanisms to report did not exist. The UAPTF focused on reports of UAP witnessed firsthand by aviators and contained data from reliable systems. The cases range from 2004 to 2021, with a majority of cases occurring in the previous 2 years. The UAPTF looked at 144 cases, 80 of which were observed with multiple sensors. Of these cases, only one was able to be successfully identified as a balloon. Most reports described UAP interrupting training or military activity. Page 4 highlights the UAP collection challenges and brings up the social stigma, stating, narratives from aviators and the operational community and analysis from the military and IC describe disparagement associated with observing UAP, reporting it, or attempting to discuss it with colleagues. Although the effects of these stigma have lessened as senior members of the scientific, policy, military, and intelligence communities engage on the topic seriously in public, reputational risk may keep many observers silent, complicating scientific pursuit of the topic. An interesting point made on page 5 is that in 18 incidents described in 21 reports, observers reported unusual UAP movement or flight characteristics. To directly quote the report, some UAP appeared to remain stationary in winds aloft, moving against the wind, maneuver abruptly, or move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. In a small number of cases, military aircraft systems processed radio frequency energy associated with UAP sightings. The UAPTF holds a small amount of data that appear to show UAP demonstrating acceleration or a degree of signature management. Additional rigorous analysis are necessary by multiple teams or groups of technical experts to determine the nature and validity of these data. We are conducting further analysis to determine if breakthrough technologies were demonstrated. The report explains that UAP probably lack a single explanation and most likely fell into one of 5 potential explanatory categories: airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, U.S. government or industry development programs, foreign adversary systems, or a catch-all other bin. The other bin is described as other. Although most of the UAP described in our dataset probably remain unidentified due to limited data or challenges to collection processing or analysis, we may require additional scientific knowledge to successfully collect on, analyze, and characterize some of them. We would group such objects in this category pending scientific advances that allowed us to better understand them. The UAPTF intends to focus additional analysis on the small number of cases where a UAP appeared to display unusual flight characteristics or signature management. The last section of the report details that explaining UAP will require analytic collection and more resources invested. The last page of the report also makes a point to note that they receive the most cooperation from the U.S. Navy, and respectfully hopes more data from the Air Force will be made available. In the end, the conclusion of this report is that there are UAP in our skies, and in order to adequately explain them, more resources are needed, as well as a unified process for reporting UAP across the defense and intelligence communities. Many in the UFO community were underwhelmed with the report, but I think it is very important. The fact that there are cases that the ODNI has labeled unexplained is very significant in my opinion. The report states that in 18 incidents, described in 21 reports, observers reported unusual UAP movements patterns or flight characteristics, and the report states that the UAPTF has 11 reports of documented instances in which pilots reported near misses with the UAP. The report also calls for further investigations and resources to be poured into the UAP issue. These are all big statements in my opinion. This is just another quick point I want to bring up. If you will recall, the ODNI was created following the intelligence failures of 9/11. It was thought that the failure to share intelligence across the agencies helped allow that tragedy to happen. I find it highly suspect that in the 20 years since the creation of the ODNI, there was not already a unified system for reporting unidentified flying objects in the sky, since the ODNI was created because of 9/11. Not only is there not a unified reporting system, but there is an active culture of stigmatization amongst the agencies and military branches regarding UAP encounters. These are just things to consider, but best left for another video. Something else that should be noted is that the Air Force, who ran the UFO investigations from the 1940s through the 1960s, was largely absent in offering any data despite being tasked by the ODNI. Very suspect.
The Air Force has been accused from time to time of hiding information about UFO. What do you have to say to that, Colonel Kathleen?
Well, these charges are absolutely untrue.
There's nothing to hide.
There's nothing to hide at all.
The same day as the release of the report, June 25, 2021, Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines released a memorandum to senior Pentagon officials that highlights the report and states that the scope of UAP goes beyond the purview of the Secretary of the Navy, who currently heads the UAPTF. She then goes on to direct the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security to develop a plan to formalize the mission of the UAPTF. The plan should establish procedures to synchronize collection, reporting, and analysis on UAP, identify requirements for operations of new activity in terms of resources and staff, and lastly, the plan should be developed in coordination with the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secretaries of the military departments, and the commanders of the combatant command with the DNI and other relevant agencies. She closes by stating that all members of departments should report UAP observations within 2 weeks. With this memo, DNI Avril Haines was putting into motion further UAP actions from the Department of Defense, without the direction of Congress. Though underwhelming to some, the report did succeed in galvanizing those lawmakers that saw the unclassified version. Following the release of the report, we heard from various elected and government officials.
As you could imagine, the American people probably share my concern that we have a system-wide outage when I'm asking questions about UFOs, and whether it's the Chinese or the Russians or it's actually people in other places. So let's try to ask this UFO a question again and see if the systems will hold up.
But what this report really underscores, Dan, is that that there are a number of instances, and the specific number remains classified, but a number of instances where we've ruled all of that out. And there are technologies that we don't have, and frankly, that we're not capable of defending against based on those things that we've seen, multiple sensors. In other words, where not just people visually see it, but where it's picked up on radar, where it's seen on satellites. And so, you know, it's an issue of national security, and as the person who was informing policy makers about national
Well, I don't believe they're coming from foreign adversaries. If they were, why, that would suggest that they have a technology which is in a whole different sphere than anything we understand. And frankly, China and Russia just aren't there. And either are we, by the way. So I'm not worried about it from a national security standpoint. If for some reason these came from another system, if you will, another alien society, which I frankly would find hard to believe, but I guess all things are possible, that would be fascinating. Interesting. I know there are, they say, trillions of galaxies out there, so who knows what might have developed somewhere else. But that would make me more fascinated, not fearful.
The government doesn't trust the people to be able to understand the information, I believe. This report is a joke. I mean, it really has nothing in it of any substance. I could have drawn this up when I was in the 5th grade by reading books on UFOs. I mean, you know, it's what I really think happened was I think they had a serious report, and you've got some good people on that intelligence committee. Devin Nunes and some of the others are excellent. Couldn't ask for anybody better. But the truth is, I think they put a report out they were getting ready to put a very extensive report out, and then somebody pulled it back.
I was surprised with the initial reports when they came out, and I thought the report was a very thoughtful first step to think about these things. Again, it was inconclusive. They don't have any compelling evidence that there is that there's some type of
not going to get the information we really need initially until we have classified briefings. And as the chairman of that committee, my hope is to have a series of hearings, and one of them being a public hearing, so we can at least provide the information to the American public to the degree that will not compromise our national security, to give them some kind of resolve and I think quell their thirst for this wonderful phenomenon that we've been talking about and movies have been made about for the past 7 or 8 decades.
If you will note, Representative Andre Carson of Indiana called for public congressional hearings on UFOs. As far as I'm aware, this is the first time since the disclosure of ATIP that a sitting member of Congress has called for public hearings on UFOs. Around the world, the UAPTF report was becoming a part of the global UAP conversation. In June, the South China Morning Post reported that the Chinese military was beginning to use AI to track rapidly increasing UFOs. The People's Liberation Army calls UFOs unidentified air conditions, and according to Wuhan-based researcher Chen Li from the Air Force Early Warning Academy, human analysts have been overwhelmed in recent years by the rapidly mounting sighting reports from a wide range of military and civilian sources across the country. A Chinese radar scientist based in Xi'an did state that the increase in UFOs in Chinese airspace was most likely caused by humans rather than aliens. The article is very interesting and linked in the description. The UAPTF report also came up in the Australian Federal Parliament and in the United Kingdom's House of Lords. Both instances are kind of awkward and indicate that the classified version of the report was not shared with our Australian or British allies.
Great. My question relates to the, I know we have close ties with the US, we share intelligence. My questions relate to release of the report on the 25th of June 2021 by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Preliminary Assessments, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. This is an issue that has been raised in Congress. The Department of Defense has submitted a report. It's become a significant matter of public interest. And I suppose my first question is, are you aware of that report, Chief of Air Force?
I'm not formally aware of the report, but if I'm thinking there was an article in the newspapers, a commentary about that at some stage, but I'm not quite sure of the content of the report.
I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
I call the Minister, Baroness Goldie.
My Lords, the Ministry of Defence notes the content of the report. The Department holds no reports on unidentified aerial phenomena, but constantly monitors UK airspace to identify and respond to any credible threat to its integrity, and is confident in the existing measures in place to protect it.
Lord Safras.
My Lords, for decades, people who have been concerned with UFOs have been dismissed as fantasists. But now the US Director of National Intelligence, who oversees 17 intelligence agencies, has published a report saying the data on UFOs is inconclusive. The report offers several possible explanations and does not rule out that these could be military aircraft with very advanced capabilities or even extraterrestrial phenomena. Either way, can my noble friend the Minister reassure members of the public that the Ministry of Defence takes reports of unidentified objects in our airspace very seriously, and will she consider publishing a detailed assessment of the data we hold?
What I would say to my noble friend is that the MOD deals with actual threats substantiated by evidence, and the government continues to take any potential threat to the UK seriously. The Integrated Review and the Defence White Command paper published in March set out the MOD's assessment of the threats we face and how we will meet them.
On the home front, an interesting development occurred in the field of academia, with the creation of the Galileo Project on July 25, 2021, by Harvard University professor Avi Loeb. This project's goal is to bring a newfound scientific rigor to the study of UAP. I will have to do a whole video covering the Galileo Project at some point, but for now it is important to note that Avi Loeb and Harvard University are opening up the academic window into the study of UAP. They plan to make their findings public and open a peer review. Even though many in the UFO community thought that the report was lackluster, many of the politicians who saw the unclassified version of the report were emboldened to not let the UFO issue die. Legislation soon began circulating in the legislative branch regarding UFOs. Quickly, I want to highlight veteran UFO researcher D. Dean Johnson. He is often the first to obtain and report on many of these intricate legislative developments we will be covering, finding and sharing the actual documents online and writing thorough and comprehensive updates on his blog. He has been sourced in mainstream publications like Politico, and his work was extremely helpful in making this video. I highly recommend following him on Twitter and reading his blog, both of which are linked in the description. Following the UAPTF report, there were various UAP pieces of legislation that began circulating. To help us make sense of these various pieces of UAP legislation, let us quickly recap the legislative process and how it applies here with UAP. In the US, the legislative branch is responsible for writing and drafting bills that will eventually become laws. The legislative branch is composed of the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate is composed of 50 individuals, 2 from each state, and the House of Representatives is composed of 435 individuals, with varying numbers from the various states depending on population. In order for a bill to make its way to the President's desk to be signed into law, it must pass both the House and the Senate, and often there are varying amendments made to the bill along the way. Back to UFOs. Following the UAPTF report, we saw various pieces of legislation from committees and politicians who received the classified version of the report. The goal of these politicians was to have a final version of UAP legislation hashed out in time for the annual National Defense Authorization Act being signed by the President in December. The National Defense Authorization Act is basically the annual budget of the Defense Department and related expenditures. The UAP legislation we will be discussing is just one small part of this giant defense spending bill. First, in the Senate, roughly a month after the UAPTF report, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence added an amendment to the upcoming 2022 Intelligence Authorization Bill that would basically extend the charter of the UAPTF and increase their funding, as well as expanding the list of recipients of future reports to various other committees. These classified reports would be quarterly. This Senate provision did not include a stipulation that any reports be made available to the general public, however. In the House of Representatives, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence also included a provision to their version of the defense bill that would create a permanent UAP task force that emphasized the task force having the ability to draw on classified information from various agencies related to UAP investigations. Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff, referred to the provision as a bicameral provision mandating intelligence sharing with the Department of Defense's UAP task force that will ensure that the task force will be able to fully draw on all classified reporting about UAPs as they continue to investigate this mysterious threat to U.S. airspace and our military forces. Both the Senate and the House Intelligence Committee's UAP provisions were great first steps, but they were limited in scope. The House language has a little more detailed, substantive requirements on some points, but requires less frequent reports to Congress. This language also doesn't create a new office, but rather extends the charter of the UAPTF. And neither the Senate or House language included a stipulation for further public reports from the UAPTF. Both the House and Senate provisions were approved in their respective chambers to continue along the legislative path. Each of these pieces of legislation would soon, however, get their own substantive amendments added. In the House of Representatives, Representative Ruben Gallego of Arizona's 7th Congressional District would introduce more substantive UAP amendments to the House's version of the defense bill in September of 2021. Some highlights from Rep. Gallego's legislation are as follows. This bill would establish a permanent UAP office within the Secretary of Defense to study UAP. The duties of this office are to develop and synchronize collection and reporting on UAP data across the Department of Defense, develop a central repository for all UAP encounters, establish procedures for the timely reporting of UAP events, evaluating UAP in relation to foreign governments, evaluating the threat level to the United States, and coordinating with U.S. allies regarding UAP. The Gallego legislation requires annual reports on 10 UAP-related categories, including events, data collection, intelligence, geospatial data, signal data, human data, and various others. Unfortunately, the Gallego legislation did not include any requirements for unclassified reports to be released to the public. Some interesting pieces of this legislation are the requirements that the reports also include an update on coordination with allies on this issue. This indicates to me that there will likely be more global cooperation on UAP, and our Australian and British allies won't be so left in the dark. Another interesting requirement was this piece of language that reads, an update on any efforts underway on the ability to capture or exploit discovered unidentified aerial phenomena. This is pretty interesting in my opinion. There is nothing in the UAPTF report that indicated we have captured or exploited UAP. I suspect that this language came from data in the classified version of the UAPTF report. This whole thing could be referring to foreign craft, but if it isn't, this is pretty significant in my opinion. Lastly, as far as the Gallego legislation goes, there is a requirement for the report to include, quote, an assessment of any health-related effects for individuals that have encountered unidentified aerial phenomena. I find this extremely interesting as well. As far as I know, this is the first mention of health-related effects of UAP in the whole official post-2017 narrative. There is nothing in the official narrative of the release of the 3 Navy videos or the UAPTF June report that would indicate any particular health effects. I suspect we will be seeing more regarding health effects of UAP in the future. A downside of the Gallego legislation is that no public unclassified reports were on the table. Still, this amendment is very exciting, and upon the public release of this amendment, Ruben Gallego spoke on UAP.
So let me tell you where the genesis of my legislation comes from. So I'm the chairman of Intelligence and Special Operations, for which some reason UAPs, or UFOs as people know them, fall under my jurisdiction. So I had a hearing regarding this, and one of the things that was very clear about it is that we just don't have enough information. And even that the information the Department of Defense has is useless information. It is anecdotal evidence and/or even film, whatever it is, but we have no reference points to it. And there is no unified way to actually collect this information. Nobody knows what to do with this information. And so the reason I put this legislation together is because we need to treat this as a real problem set. Not that, maybe these foreign, aliens or out of world aliens are a threat. The problem set is that we don't have enough information to make any decisions. So the way you do that is you actually gather the information so that way you can actually, have some viable actions on it. So no, largely there hasn't been any level of seriousness to this. It's largely, mostly the Air Force that's taking this information and somewhat the Navy and then kind of just, shuffling it off in a report. And the other thing is because we haven't really made a formal process to this, a lot of, military men and women, just don't want to say anything because they're afraid that it'll affect their career. So we have, information bias happening right now. So the only information we're getting are from people that want to talk. The people that probably have more information are afraid to talk. And then even if they do talk, the information goes nowhere. There's no follow-up. There's no, someone that is trying to put their brain power on this. And that's the goal of this, right? The goal of my legislation is to treat this like a real problem set. And the way you do that when you're dealing with the Pentagon is you have a system-wide understanding of how to collect this information, how to collect this data, let's analyze the data, and then let's come up with recommendations about what this is and what we should do about it. Because right now, it's really unfair, I think, for the NASA administrator to speculate that it is, otherworldly objects or aliens, because data doesn't prove anything like that.
Back in the Senate, more legislative developments were occurring with the UAP language originally approved by the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator Gillibrand of New York would submit some pretty substantive UAP amendments in early November 2021. What would be known as the Gillibrand Amendment would be more comprehensive and in-depth than the Gallego Amendment. The Gillibrand Amendment would create a new office called the Anomaly Surveillance and Resolution Office, or ASRO, within 180 days of being signed into law. This office would be a permanent UAP office created within the Department of Defense. The amendment makes it clear that the UAPTF would be terminated or made subordinate to the newly created ASRO. This would allow for Congress to have oversight over the UAP issue. The Gillibrand Amendment also clearly lays out how each element of the intelligence community and the Department of Defense are to overhaul their UAP reporting policies and procedures. All agencies are to be on the same page and to immediately report any UAP encounters. The DoD is to create a central depository for these UAP reports across the intelligence community. This new office is instructed to evaluate adversary governments and to consult with outside agencies like the FAA, NASA, the Department of Energy, and many others. Some other functions of ASRO that the Gillibrand Amendment lays out are to create a rapid response team to respond to UAP events. and to designate an organization to scientifically analyze all reports, including testing materials, medical studies, and theoretical models to explain UAP. This new office will have the authority to draw on appropriate personnel outside the agencies, directed to study the technical and operational characteristics as well as origins and the intentions of unidentified aerial phenomena. In regards to funding, the Gillibrand amendment reads, "There is authorized to be appropriated such sums as may be necessary to carry out the work of the office, including 1. General intelligence gathering and intelligence analysts, and 2. Strategic defense, space defense, defense of controlled airspace, defense of ground, air, or naval assets, and related purposes." The Gillibrand Amendment then goes into the requirements for annual reports on UAP. There are many detailed requirements of this new organization for their annual reports. There are 14 total categories, 10 of them borrowed from the Gallego legislation. Some that stick out are an update on efforts to capture or exploit discovered unidentified aerial phenomena, an assessment of any health-related effects for individuals who have encountered unidentified aerial phenomena, the number of reported incidents and descriptions thereof of unidentified aerial phenomena associated with military nuclear assets, including strategic nuclear weapons and nuclear-powered ships and submarines. This last point is referencing the UFO nuclear connection. I recommend watching my video on Robert Hastings to learn more about that. The Gillibrand Amendment also includes biannual briefings to Congressional Armed Services and Intelligence Committees. The amendment also deals with the historical issue of stovepiping and classification by stating the new office shall report to Congress of any instances in which data related to unidentified aerial phenomena was denied to the Anomaly Surveillance and Resolution Office because of classification restrictions on that data or for any other reason. When compared to the Gallego Amendment in the House, the Gillibrand Amendment in the Senate is far more comprehensive and detailed, specifying a new office that will hopefully overcome some of the classification issues the subject of UAP has had in the past, and requesting detailed updates on specific aspects of UAP, like biological effects on humans, crash retrievals, and operation around nuclear facilities. It should be noted that none of these aspects were present in the publicly released UAPTF report back in June. Following the release of this amendment, Senator Gillibrand would speak publicly on UAP for the first time.
On their aircraft, whether it's their radar systems, whether it's through video systems, whether it's through heat sensors. And unfortunately, over many years, the military sometimes does not respond well when an airman comes forward and says, "I've seen something I cannot identify." And we want that era to stop. If an airman sees something that they cannot identify, we need to know what that is. We need to know if it's aircraft from a foreign adversary, such as Russia or China. And if it truly is unidentified, if it truly is unknown, we also need to know that. So as the chairwoman of personnel, I need service members to be able to come forward, document something they've seen that doesn't make sense, it doesn't ring true on their...
New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand co-sponsored that amendment with fellow Senate Intelligence Committee member Marco Rubio, among others. She says this is urgent, regardless of the origins of UAP, and recently told Politico, quote, "If it is technologically possessed by adversaries or any other entity, we need to know. Burying our heads in the sand is neither a strategy nor an acceptable approach."
With both the Gillibrand Amendment in the Senate and the Gallego Amendment in the House of Representatives, it was looking very promising that some significant UAP legislation would end up in the final version of the Defense Authorization Act for 2022. The congressional branch of government was continuing along the UAP path. Now, if you'll remember, when the UAPTF released their report in June, the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, released a memo that same day stating that the Department of Defense was to create a new office to handle the UAP issue. This is important to keep in mind as we have multiple things going on here. We have the Gallego and Gillibrand amendments working in Congress, and we also have the Department of Defense tasked by the ODNI to create a new UAP office separate of any congressional effort or oversight. The Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, would speak publicly on UAP for the first time in November.
DNI Haines, on this topic of life out there, you issued an extraordinary preliminary assessment in June on unidentified aerial phenomena, is the new term of art. To summarize that report, you studied 144 reports from U.S. government sources. 80 had multiple sensors that had made the identifications. In 18 of these instances, observers, I'm quoting, reported unusual UAP flight characteristics. You sorted these into 5 different bins. The last call just other. I want to ask you to share with the audience your takeaway after the completion of that report, and what your own view is as you look at the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is that we don't understand everything that we're seeing, and that's probably not surprising to anybody in many respects. But it was a report that really, Congress asked us to produce a report that assessed what we saw as the threat, essentially, from unidentified aerial phenomena, and what our sort of best understanding was of the different reports that we had identified. And it stretched over from, I think, 2004 through to 2021, the different reports that you indicated, 144 of them. And we had different categories, as you said. So one of them was airborne clutter, another was natural phenomenon, another was foreign adversaries, a fourth one was related to sort of US government or industry developmental programs, and then the fifth one was other. And that basically indicated that we were pretty sure we weren't going to be able to characterize every single one of these reports in the various categories that we'd identified, because frankly we were not able to understand everything about it. And a large portion of that is based on the fact that we don't have a consistent way of reporting this information. We need to integrate, frankly, a lot of data that we get. We need to get better at collecting information that's useful to us from different sensors that are available to us, and we have to deepen our analysis in these areas. And that.
Shortly after this appearance, on November 23, 2021, the Department of Defense released their response to Avril Haines' June memo and established the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group, or AOIMSG, under the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. The announcement states, "The AOIMSG will synchronize efforts across the Department of Defense and broader U.S. government to detect, identify, and attribute objects of interest in special use airspace, and to assess and mitigate any associated threats to safety of flight and national security." To provide oversight to the AOIMSG, the Deputy Secretary also directed the USD-INS to lead an Airborne Object Identification and Management Executive Council, to be comprised of DoD and intelligence community membership, and to offer a venue for U.S. government interagency representation.
And a new Pentagon group has quite the name, the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group. That was a mouthful. It will be made up of defense and intelligence experts, and they'll study UAP sightings near military areas. Adrian.
U.S. defense officials have announced now a new task force to investigate reports of unidentified flying objects intruding on restricted American airspace. It's going to be called, and this is a mouthful, the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group.
Reported last month, U.S. defense officials announced the creation of their own office to catalog and track reports and data from UAP sightings. That happened just a few weeks after the Gillibrand-Rubio proposal landed in the NDAA.
We just know that there is this very long acronymed group now that is in the intelligence division with the Pentagon that is going to be looking at this. Exactly what they will do is going to be a subject of probably a lot of scrutiny and a lot of tug of wars between the Pentagon and Capitol Hill.
Now, to many in the UFO community, this DNI initiative was a welcome addition to the already circulating UAP legislation in Congress. There were some, however, that felt that this new office would undermine the congressional oversight and continue the system of strict classification that has been in place on UAP. Of the AOIMSG, Lou Elizondo, the man who ran the Pentagon UFO program originally disclosed in 2017, would say, "If we want 70 more years of secrecy on this topic, then OUSD is the perfect place to put it. They've had 4 years so far, and we've had little in the way of efforts serving the public interest. If we want meaningful change and transparency, then we should keep the spirit of the Gillibrand Amendment. Hicks is being hoodwinked by certain elements and members of her own staff. If Hicks had the complete picture, she would not have made the decision to place the UFO mission under the purview of OUSD-INS. Christopher Mellon, who ran OUSD-INS's predecessor organization during the Clinton and George W. Bush administrations, and who most likely helped draft the Gillibrand Amendment, would say, "The inability of OUSD-INS to engage effectively on the UFO issue is why so little has changed or been accomplished since 2004.
Last summer's UFO report, Mr. Speaker, from the Director of National Intelligence was bogus.
The report raised more questions than answers about unidentified objects in the skies. It stunk of a government cover-up, Mr. Speaker. Now the Pentagon is starting a new office to collect information on these unidentified objects. The office is called the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group. I don't know where they came up with that name. I'm sure they paid somebody a lot of money to come up with that. I do not trust this new office, Mr. Speaker. I don't think it'll be transparent with lawmakers or the public about its findings. This is a national security issue. Congress needs to know what is going on so we can respond accordingly. Today, I'm requesting the leaders of this new office bring members of Congress on their bring them in on their UFO findings. This is a matter of great public interest and has been for a very long time to a lot of Americans. Our government should not hide the truth from us for another second. If this new office is to be held accountable, our country will get more reports like the one that came out last summer, or worse, they will be silent and hope we all just forget about the phenomena. We do not need to fear these airborne and unidentified objects. They would have shown themselves to be dangerous a long time ago by now if they were a threat. Our citizens and country can handle the truth, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the remainder of my time.
On December 7, 2021, the UAP language agreed upon by negotiators from the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives was released. The new language contains many of the best parts of the Gallego and Gillibrand legislation. One provision that did not make it was a provision that would have created a civilian adversity council. But aside from that, most of the two efforts made it into the final proposal. The final product of the Gallego-Gillibrand negotiations would end up in the final version of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2022, beginning on page 578 of the NDAA and totaling 7 pages. And on December 27, 2021, President Joe Biden signed the $770 billion NDAA for fiscal year 2022 into law, including the UAP provision that had worked its way through the legislative branch in the previous months. I highly recommend reading the legislation for yourself, but there is going to be a new permanent UAP office created with congressional oversight. This office will step further into things like health-related effects, crash retrievals, or materials of UAP. It will have a rapid response team to respond to UAP. It will investigate the UFO nuclear connection, investigate how they operate, their origins and intent, among many other things. It is an exciting time to be a UFO enthusiast with this new ASRO office being created. It is still not clear how the legislative branch created ASRO will work with the Department of Defense created AOIMSG. Will these two offices be at odds? Will they work together? This is yet to be determined, but we shall soon learn. One last UFO development occurred in December of 2021, one day after the signing of the NDAA. Former Senator Harry Reid passed away on December 28, 2021. At the age of 82. Harry Reid was one of the senators, along with Daniel Inouye, John Glenn, and Ted Stevens, who originally got the funding for the Pentagon UFO program in 2007. After the disclosure of this program in 2017, Harry Reid would be a vocal advocate for the reality of UFOs and the need for serious addressal. With Harry Reid's passing, now all 4 senators responsible for that initial UFO program that started this all are gone. The trajectory we are on looks promising thanks to vocal advocates like Harry Reid. Rest in peace.